We're going to be talking about research study designs and looking at abstracts. So let's get started. There are different types of research. There's primary research and secondary research, and we're going to start with primary research study designs. The first type of primary research we're going to look at are what are called observational studies. And in observational studies, we're observing the subjects. And there are different types of observational studies. One is called a cohort, meaning that we follow a group over time. And we can do a prospective cohort study or a retrospective cohort study. Prospective means looking to the future, or another word that we see often associated with this is a longitudinal study. And it basically means that we are taking a group of people and following them into the future. So if I give you all a survey today, this nutrition class on your vegetable intake, and then every year for 5 years, I give you a survey and I ask you about your vegetable intake, that would be an example of a prospective cohort study where we follow you over time for 5 years. A retrospective study is looking back. An example might be that we have a group of women with breast cancer, and we look back on their diet and have them answer questions about their diet for, say, the last 10 to 15 years to see if there are any connections with diet and breast cancer. Now, another type of observational study is called a case control study. And in a case control, you look at two groups of people, one with the condition you're looking at and one without. So for example, we might look at a group of people with heart disease and a group of people without heart disease, and then we can study those groups and find maybe the risks for developing heart disease. And then the last type we're going to look at here is called a cross-sectional study, and that is when we just do something at one point in time. So if I give you all a survey right now and I ask you questions about your cooking skills and I get data off of that questionnaire, that is a cross-sectional study. We're just looking at your cooking skills at one point in time. Now let's look at experimental studies. And I think this is what most people think of when they think of research. With experimental studies, we're going to talk about randomized controlled trials and animal or in vitro studies. So a randomized controlled trial, you can have different sample sizes and different populations, but what you do is you randomize the intervention and you can control it against something else. So let me give you an example. Let's take all of the college age males in this class, and we are going to feed you different beverages. One will be water, one will be a beverage containing high fructose corn syrup, and the other one will be a beverage made with sugar. And then we're going to have you drink the beverage, and we're going to measure the effect of that beverage on your blood glucose levels. And we're going to give you those drinks in random order. So we have randomized the study, so it's randomized, and you're actually your own control. So your body's reaction to water compared to your body's reaction to the drink with sugar will be uncontrolled. So that's randomized and controlled. Let me give you an example of a non-controlled trial. So let's take this nutrition class right now, and I'm going to give you a survey and ask you about how many vegetables you eat. Then we're going to do an intervention, and I'm going to do a series of cooking classes, and I teach you how to cook different vegetables, and we talk about different vegetables. And then later on, we do the survey again, and we see how many vegetables you eat. That would not be controlled because we're not controlling for the intervention. We need to compare you if it's going to be controlled to a group who didn't get the intervention. So if we took another nutrition class and I surveyed them on their vegetable intake, but they didn't get the classes about vegetables and cooking vegetables, and then we surveyed them again, they could act as the control. So the group who didn't get the education would be the control. All right, another type of experimental study are laboratory animal studies, studies on cells, and in vitro studies. We often call this basic research. We can study microorganisms or cells or cell cultures or different animal models. So an example might be some researchers wanting to look at liver cells and the study the effect that a drug might have on liver cells. So they might take mice and give them the drug and study the liver cells. Or we might take rats and feed them different types of diets and see what effect it has on their weight or different blood levels. Just a funny story, when I was in college, I was actually part of a research group that studied different diet effects on rats, and one of the diets we fed them was potato chips and Kool-Aid. They were very sticky, kind of gross rats, just so you know. Now, the outcomes of this basic research on cells and animals, they really help us understand what's going on, at a cellular level, and they give us mechanisms, and then we can follow up with that research in humans. The last type of study design we're going to talk about are epidemiologic studies. Epidemiology studies are studies of populations, and they might be descriptive. For example, the percent of obese people in all the different states in the United States, or the number of people who get the flu in October versus the number of people who get the flu in July. Those are descriptive. They can also be analytical, looking at different data. And epidemiologic studies can be a cross-section, just a point in time, or they can follow cohorts through time. Now, epidemiologic studies never prove causation, but they can give us risk factors. This is where we get, oh, these are the risk factors for developing diabetes, or the risk factors for developing cancer, or for developing heart disease. And these studies can be prospective or retrospective. Okay, our next examples are examples of secondary research. And we have what's called a meta-analysis. So in meta-analyses, researchers, they take multiple previously published studies. So that's why the term is secondary. So the studies have already been done, and they take multiple studies on a topic that they want to look at to determine the overall effect. So it compares and analyzes the results of all these different studies. And this really adds value because you get more data and more information than one study. A systematic review is similar, but a systematic review is a comprehensive review of all the research in a topic. It's not necessarily an analysis of the results and data. So researchers take all the different studies on their selected topic, and they evaluate the quality of the different studies, and then they synthesize all the findings to give overall information on the topic. And the process is systematic, and that's where the name comes from. So it means that there's a set system of how they go about doing this, how they select their research studies, how they evaluate them, and anybody who follows the process should come out with the same results. When we are looking at research, there are different levels of evidence. And this is just a graphic showing you high levels of evidence versus lower levels, or stronger evidence versus weaker evidence. So if you look at the top, your highest levels of evidence are those meta-analysis and systematic reviews, because they're taking a lot of studies on a topic and getting information for that. And where your lower levels are animal and in vitro studies. You don't need to memorize these levels, but it's just really good to be aware of the levels of evidence when you're reading nutrition research. Okay, one of the things you do need to be able to do in this class is to look at an abstract and determine what kind of study design is this. So we're going to work through a few abstracts together. This first one is titled Open Educational Research Textbook Impact on Students in an Introductory Course. By the way, it was a nutrition course. All right. What you do is when you get an abstract, you want to look through the abstract and find any words or anything that would help you determine, is this an observational study? Is this an experimental study? Is this a meta-analysis? I'm going to suggest that you pause the video, look through the abstract, and see if you can find something, and then come back. Okay, welcome back. So was there anything that you found in this abstract that helps you know what type of study design it was? Well, for me, yes, right here on design, it says this was a cross-sectional study. And we just learned that cross-sectional studies are a type of observational study. And the researchers were observing how different textbooks, an open access text versus a traditional text, affected or impacted grades. So this is an observational study. All right, let's look at another one. This is titled Fruit and Vegetable Intake and Breast Cancer Risk Defined by Estrogen and Progesterone Receptor Studies, the Japan Public Health Center-based prospective study. Quite a long title. Okay, again, pause the video, look for words in the abstract that could cue you to the type of study. Okay, welcome back. I can see a few things in this. right here in the background, it uses the word epidemiological. We just learned about epidemiologic studies and that they're a type of observation study. Down here in the design section, it talks about a population study. And, that's a key word. Epidemiology is a study of populations. And then I also see another word. It's a cohort design. And we learned that a cohort is an observational study. So we know that epidemiology is an observational study and cohorts are an observational study. So this would be an observational study. Okay, one more to practice. This type of abstract is called unstructured. The other ones were structured. They had headers that helped you look through it. But in this abstract, the title is, Does Calorie Information Promote Lower Calorie? That should say fast food choices, not fat food. Fast food choices among college students. Okay, you're going to look at this abstract and you're asking yourself, is this observational? Is it experimental? Is it epidemiological? Is it a meta-analysis or a systematic review? Hey, welcome back. When I look at this, I ask myself questions. Is it experimental? Is it a randomized controlled trial? No, they didn't randomize anybody and they didn't control. Wasn't animal, wasn't in vitro. So it's not experimental. Then I ask, was it a cohort or a case control or a cross-sectional, one of those observational studies? Yeah, it was cross-sectional. They took these students at one point in time, they gave them menu information and calories, and then they looked to see if it changed what choices they made from the menu. So yes, it was cross-sectional. So remember that, it was cross-sectional. Is it looking at a population or diseases in the population? No, it's got just different college students, but it's not looking at an entire population. So it's not an epidemiologic study. Is it a meta-analysis or a systematic review? No, it's not an analysis of many studies. So we did say it is cross-sectional, and we learned that cross-sectional is a type of observational study. So this would be an observational study. So take some time, practice through abstracts so that when you see an abstract on an exam, you'll be able to determine what type of study the research is.